Good day, everyone. So, we are the Group 4 presenters. Our topic for today is about Chapter 4 Designing Meaningful Performance Based Assessment. Here's an overview of the topic. As we learn the nature of performance based assessment, its characteristics, types, advantages, and limitations, the next step is to design it aligned to the learning goals. Focusing on the knowledge and skills targeted, you will need to think of some tasks which must be performed authentically. Clearly, comprehensive planning and designing to performance-based assessment should be taken into consideration. Here's our chapter intended learning outcome. At the end of the chapter, you should be able to develop a portfolio of performance-based assessment tools that measures learners' competencies of a given subject. Here are the steps in developing a meaningful performance-based assessment, both process and product. First, defining the purpose of assessment. 2. Identifying performance tasks. 3. Developing scoring schemes. 4. Rating the performance. First, let's discuss about defining the purpose of assessment. The first step in designing performance-based assessment is to define the purpose of assessment. Defining the purpose and target of assessment provides information on what students need to be performed in a task given. By identifying the purpose, teachers are able to easily identify the weaknesses and strengths of the student's performance. Purpose must be specified at the beginning of the process so that the proper kinds of performance criteria and scoring procedures can be established. Basic questions which teachers ask in determining possible learning competencies to be considered are listed below. Here are the 5 questions to consider in determining competencies. The 5 questions: first, what important cognitive skills or attributes do I want my students to develop? So here's an example. Communicate effectively in writing. Employ algebra to solve real-life problems. Number 2, what social and effective skills or attributes do I want my students to develop? Example, work independently, appreciate individual differences. Number 3, what metacognitive do I want my students to develop? Example, reflect on the writing process, self-monitor progress while working on an independent project. Number 4, what types of problems do I want my students to be able to solve? Example, perform research, predict consequences. Number 5, what concepts and principles do I want my students to be able to apply? An example, understand cause and effect relationships, use principles of ecology and conservation. Next is we have here the 4 types of learning targets used in performance assessment. In defining the purpose of assessment, learning target must be carefully identified and taken in consideration. Performance assessments primarily use 4 types of learning targets, which are deep understanding, reasoning, skills, and products. Let's talk about first the deep understanding. This idea is to involve students meaningfully in hands-on activities for extended period of time so that their understanding is rich and more extensive than what can be attained by more conventional instructions and traditional paper and pencil assessments. Also, it includes mastery of facts and information, typically through recall. As you can see, I have here an examples of deep understanding. Recognizes and describes patterns of human behavior. Understands long-term physiological benefits of regular participation in physical activity. Knows that energy can be transformed between various forms. Also, here's a content standard keywords written below. You can read it by yourself. Next type of learning targets used in performance assessment is reasoning. Students use what they know to reason and solve problem. Includes problem solving, critical thinking, synthesis, comparing, higher order thinking skills, and judgments. So here's an example. Analysis fitness assessments to set personal fitness goals, strategies, ways to reach goals, evaluates activities. And another example is examines data or results and proposes meaningful interpretation. The content standard keywords are written below as well. The third type of learning targets is skills. Students use their knowledge and reasoning to act skillfully. Also, involves something that a student must demonstrate in a way other than answering questions. Psychomotor skills. Psychomotor skills describe clearly and physical action required for a given task. These may be developmentally appropriate skills or skills that are needed for specific tasks, such as fine motor skills, gross motor actions, more complex athletic skills, some visual skills, and verbal auditory skills for young children. These skills also identify the level at which the skill is to be performed. Generally, deep understanding and reasoning involved in deep, complex thinking about what is known and application of knowledge and skills in novel and sophisticated way. Skills include students' proficiency in reasoning, communication, and psychomotor tasks. And examples of skills are measures length in metric and US units, reads aloud with fluency and expression, dribbles to keep the ball away from an opponent, participates in civic discussion with the aim of solving current problems. And the last example uses simple equipment and tools to gather data. The four types of learning targets is the products. Students use their knowledge, reasoning, and skills to create a concrete product. It also includes a sample of student work, such as paper, report, artwork, or other project that demonstrates the ability, knowledge, understanding, reasoning, and skills. Written below are the examples of products. 1. Constructs bar graph. Develops a personal health-related fitness plan. Constructs physical models of familiar objects. And last example is creates a scripted scene based on improvised work. Performance-based assessment is a measure of assessment based on authentic tasks such as activities, exercises, or problems that require students to show what they can do. Some performance tasks are designed to have students demonstrate their understanding by applying their knowledge to a particular situation. So we have here the process and product-oriented performance-based assessment. Let's talk about first the process-oriented performance-based assessment. Is concerned with the actual task performance rather than the output or product of an activity. A process-oriented performance-based assessment evaluates the actual task performance. It does not emphasize on the output or product of the activity. This assessment aims to know what processes a person undergoes when given a task. Learning competencies. The learning objectives in process-oriented performance-based assessment are stated in direct observable behaviors of the students. Also, competencies are defined as groups or cluster of skills and abilities needed for a particular task. On the screen is the example of process-oriented. So, task. Recite a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. Objectives. The activity aims to enable the students to recite a poem entitled The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, recites the poem from memory without referring notes. Use appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the piece. Maintain eye contact with the audience while reciting the poem. Create the ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonation. Pronounce the words clearly and with proper diction. Product-oriented performance-based assessment. Product-oriented assessment is a kind of assessment where the assessor views and scores the final product made and not on the actual performance of making that product. It is also concerned on the product alone and not on the process. It is more concerned to the outcome or the performance of the learner, and it also focuses on achievement of the learner. Also, product assessment focuses on evaluating the result or the outcome of a process. So the learning outcomes, the learning competencies associated with products or outputs are linked with an assessment with 3 levels of performance manifested by the product, namely novice or beginner's level, skilled level, expert level. So here's an example of product-oriented. Here's the table below. Creating a book cover taken from a digital camera. Performance task, creating a book cover. And the competencies, the student should be able to first, generate appropriate shots for book cover using digital cameras. Use a page layout software or presentation software. Third, create size estimation of image, shapes, and textbook in terms of importance, emphasis, and visual hierarchy, and lastly, demonstrate skills in information design principles such as clarity, balance, relevance, contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. So that's all for today, guys. I hope you've learned something from my report. And now I will give the virtual floor to the next reporter. Thank you, everyone. God bless.